You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org. Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
With Connecticut lawmakers wrapping up a short session on May 6th, a lot of bills, including one on homelessness, will have to wait until next year before getting a vote. But two bills, one on vaccinations and one on homeschooling, will make the cut. I'm reporter Allie Lamaster with what's happening and what's not at the state capitol.
A hot housing market has added hundreds of thousands of dollars to the average homeowner's net worth. But with retail and office values lagging, that leaves many residents on the hook for a much bigger share of local taxes. I'm Nick Sambides reporting on that sticker shock, this time in Stratford and Hamden.
Not so long ago, schools were encouraging students to bring their smartphones into the classroom, but not anymore. With dozens of states enacting bell-to-bell bans, lawmakers have been debating whether it's time for Connecticut to do the same. I'm Eric Obernauer with that story.
And I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and joining me and our reporters is Greg Stroud, Editor-in-Chief, and our Arts Editor, Robin Breeding. Welcome to you all. This year was a short session at the Connecticut State Legislature. It started on February 4th and ended May 6th. During that time, legislators introduced some 1,100 bills for consideration. Many of those bills never, of course, got far. Our reporter, Allie Lamaster, joins us in the studio to talk more about what got through and what didn't. Allie.
Right. At the time that we're recording this, we're still in the midst of passing legislation. It's kind of a chaotic next couple days. But some of the two bills that have really received a lot of attention from people are one on vaccinations and one on homeschooling.
Talk to us a little bit about the vaccination one, because that's been quite controversial.
Right. That bill alone brought hundreds of people to the Capitol to testify. So essentially, it would allow the Department of Health Commissioner to establish vaccine recommendations for children and adults. And it would do other things such as allow the agency to purchase from sources other than the U.S. CDC to get some of these vaccines. So it brought a lot of contention with this. I think vaccinations, that's a very controversial issue, to say the least. So this bill was brought forth, I think, as some of the proponents said, as a reaction to what's going on federally to give the state certain recommendations. And there's also a lawsuit that's going on that people have questioned why the state has gone forward with this.
Just before I let Greg in, I was just going to say, just for clarification for the listeners, this is to do with the CDC sort of jumping back and forth with regards to the vaccination situation. And obviously they want to have some sort of stability here in Connecticut. And also Connecticut apparently has done such a good job with vaccinations. We got the last measles case here because we've had such a good vaccination rate here in the state. Greg?
Well, I think I think critics or people that are concerned about vaccinations, many of them, they focused on sometimes additives to the vaccinations, but some vaccines, but sometimes to the number, and saying that there are more vaccines than there used to be in, say, the 1970s. And so this has been something that the federal government has been looking at, and a lot of doctors have been critical of. And so have you been talking to doctors, Allie, or hearing what doctors have been saying up in the Capitol about this? Or, something that we've been looking at certainly is, for all the good things that have been happening in Connecticut, frankly, sometimes the vaccination rates have been pretty low in some of the schools for childhood vaccinations. A few years ago, as low as 46% in some schools. So it's not every place. Vaccination, the issue isn't certainly over.
To your point, Greg, since we also had a religious exemption stopped as well here in the state of Connecticut, I think you'll find that there has actually been an increase in vaccinations at many schools, which is why we do have across the nation one of the best vaccination rates actually, in the whole of the US.
It was, I think what we were looking at were pockets of very low vaccination rates. And those pockets actually, in our latest reporting, our latest look at it, had actually significantly improved post-COVID. So we did have good news on this level. And so far, it appears that we've avoided the worst of the measles outbreaks that have really hit the Carolinas and Texas, and are frankly, putting children into the hospitals.
Ali, talk to us about some other of the bills as well, if you would. Obviously, we've touched quite a lot on that vaccination one. As you said, there's many others.
Right. So another one is the homeschooling bill. So at the beginning of the legislative session, there were two bills to address homeschooling. And there was a lot of feedback, a lot of criticism from homeschool families and from a lot of lawmakers as well, and even superintendents over some of the provisions in it. So it got scaled back to this bill that would essentially make a check for DCF once a parent wants their child to be homeschooled, and they would prevent them if there's an active investigation, or if someone in the household is on the child abuse registry, they would not be able to withdraw their child from school for homeschooling.
And again, just for clarification for the listeners, because I know a lot of people don't actually follow this stuff, so just that they understand, this whole bill has come about, and they've pushed so hard because we've sadly had situations here where young people have actually come to harm. And this, as I say, the whole homeschooling bill actually was reintroduced because of that. I think we also actually saw the death of a young individual as well. So an important point to make there, just as I say, for listeners to understand.
I think one of the things that Ali and I were looking at was how important is schooling and this sort of point of contact between teachers and administrators and students for discovering potential cases of abuse. And so there's something that they call mandated reporters, right? And so teachers, administrators are required by law to report cases of suspected abuse. And part of the reason is because they're the ones that have the best vantage. So I think, and in the case of DCF, Ali, roughly how many cases that DCF investigates come through the schools, particularly public schools?
We've heard the figure about roughly 40% of all reports come from school employees.
And Nick, you had a question?
My first thought was if what agency is responsible for checking with the homeschoolers, because when I've covered this issue, one of the things that's really struck me is that many homeschoolers take on an extraordinary amount of work teaching their own kids every day. So I was always curious, I'm not inclined to think DCF is going to be a great agency for that.
Right. So I think under the proposed legislation, the school districts would have to contact DCF for it. And I think that's a really interesting point you bring up about, a lot of work that this would go into, because in a prior version of this bill, which did not go through, would have asked school districts to kind of keep an eye on homeschool students by looking at a portfolio or doing a state mandated test to make sure that they're getting the equivalent instruction.
I think one of the concerns is that the agency that's in charge of looking at abuse, DCF, Department of Children and Family, it's a dysfunctional agency. And I think I don't think even the biggest defenders of the agency would disagree that it's a troubled agency. It struggles with this issue. It's not easy to handle. And so I think some of the critics say, well, so you put DCF in charge, does that really matter? Is this really, if you really wanted to prevent abuse, wouldn't you reform that agency rather than simply focusing on homeschool children? And in some ways, I think there's a partisan divide here because there's more and more conservative families that are taking their children out of schools. So it's maybe easier for Democrats to sort of pick on this group.
So I think that's really interesting. I think this came up a little bit in another bill, which is about town-run municipal camps and some of the background checks and reporting that they need to do. There was a case where there was a child that was abused by a camp counselor, and despite the fact that a DCF background check allowed this person to work at a camp, people were like, maybe we should still institute more boundaries when it comes to it to try to check. But there is the question of, do these checks, still have people fall through the cracks?
Nick, you have a point.
Yeah, I really question using DCF for this, not because the agency is poorly intentioned or anything like that, but one of the things you chronically hear about it are that it's understaffed, its case managers are overwhelmed. I mean, do you have anybody have a sense of how the agency is doing these days in terms of those issues?
Well, I guess the question is, if not DCF, who else? I mean, it's, you know, that's the agency that's in charge. I certainly know that, I mean, one of the conversations that I think Allie has had was with local school boards that said, you know, this is a pretty big burden for us to take on any extra oversight. And so, and if the state wants it and the state wants to implement this, then maybe the state should take the lead on this.
Ali, any final thoughts before we move on?
There's a lot more bills happening, and I know this will air after the legislative session's done, but we'll see what happens.
We'll come back to those because we've touched upon a few, but they were very important bills. But thank you ever so much for your reporting on that. Now, housing in Connecticut and across the nation is a hot button issue with tight markets, high interest rates, and surging home values. Not just buying, but keeping a house can be a struggle as retail and office values lag, leaving homeowners on the hook for a growing share of growing local budgets. Our reporter Nick Sambides joins us in the studio with that story. Nick.
It's an interesting thing to focus on, particularly with the fact that earlier this week, Governor Lamont sort of scrambled the whole picture because he announced that he wants to inject another $270 million into essentially one problem, keeping property taxes low when expenses from schools and municipalities are skyrocketing due to inflation, or many towns are undergoing a revaluation that has the same effect.
Well, you know, I think the thing that we see every year when we run through these revaluation cases is it doesn't increase the tax burden overall. Higher property values do not increase your taxes, but they can change how they're distributed. It's the same pie, but then they go and they cut the pie differently. And then in this case, nearly every town in Connecticut has sagging retail, sagging office spaces. It's something that's happening across the country. And so years ago, those businesses would have picked up the tab. And so now homeowners are picking up the tab instead. In some cases, I know in Old Lyme where we're located, the residential property case in some cases went up 100%. And retail 20%.
Stratford's a good case of that because in Stratford, you have an 80% jump in residential property values compared to a 22% jump in the others, commercial properties. And in terms of single home, if you had a home worth $200,000 before, assessed at $200,000 before, now that home is assessed at $360,000, which is an additional more or less $3,000 in terms of property taxes, a $3,000 bump on top of higher gas prices, heating prices, food prices. It's just pushing it. The risk is it's just pushing people out of homes.
Eric's got a point he wants to make.
Nick, I'm just curious with these, with the housing market soaring the way it is, are there data that you're aware of showing a large increase in property tax appeals by homeowners?
That's then really a big part of the next step of all the coverage of this, and just in general. I haven't seen it yet myself.
We've been reporting on this in Fairfield, in fact, and Gretchen Webster has had a report last week that showed nearly 1,000 appeals that had been lodged. And so in that case, it's a volunteer board that's handling these the first run at this, and they're overwhelmed. So it's so overwhelmed that they can't actually decide how to set the mill rate, how to set taxes. But let me just have a little bit of a counterpoint. On the one hand, people's taxes are going up. On the other hand, what we're talking about is a key asset for a lot of Americans, but not all Americans, that's going up by sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. So on the one hand, if you're renting, you don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra equity. And guess what? Their rents are going up too. So in this case, there's a little bit of, I understand that taxes are going up and it's a problem, but there is maybe Crimea River. You suddenly have $300,000-$500,000 of extra equity, and now you have to pay the piper.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in here, no question. That kind of complaint. It is fundamentally a good thing. I think one of the problems you have too is, as the state, a lot of people just don't discern from the gas prices they're paying. It all feels like one big bill to them. And so it's harder for people to discern. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Stratford's situation is they tried to get into the homestead tax exemption program, which the state just started offering recently. And the problem they have is there's so many homes that are eligible. They can't do it this year because they don't have enough town clerks or other people who could really address it in time to make the town make state deadlines on it.
What is the homestead program?
It's a program that it allows people tax credits for if they're senior citizens, say, or they're veterans. They get a tax credit of several $1,000s. In other words, under the program, assessed values can be assessed depending on where you rate by 5% to 35%. At the highest level, a projected tax $3,000 tax increase could drop to about $600, which is, boy, I'd love to have that. That's nice.
Eric.
Greg, you really raised an interesting point about the other side of this issue from a homeowner's perspective of an asset that's just going up, in leaps and bounds. On the other hand, though, counterpoint to your counterpoint, this is really, it's a paper asset, especially for those who may have a home that, they intend to live out their lives on, pass to the next generation and so forth. I just wonder also if the commoditization of housing is necessarily a good thing. That's a relatively recent phenomenon in our history. And honestly, most other countries around the world do not look at housing as an investment the way we do. It's a place to live.
So roughly from 1948 until 2008, the middle class in America was built around generational wealth created through buying a house, paying off a house, selling houses, moving up. And this is what happened. And this is part of what, when we talk about redlining, this was part of the wealth that was accumulated that was denied to African Americans. And then after 2008, we had the housing market collapsed. We started to question this. And people question, well, if houses are going up in value, how do young people then afford them? And so are increasing values a good thing? Well, I'll say if that's how most older people are paying for their retirement, if that's their nest egg, that's their safety net, then it's kind of hard to say, oh no, we wish, I hope their values don't go up. It's not really it won't really fly in a democracy, at least.
One thing I would add is with the governor's plan, he basically wants a $270 million infusion into the economy, $170 million for schools and $100 million for municipalities. And everybody that I talked to David Chess, Stratford's mayor this morning, and first thing he said is Governor Lamont is my hero. But if you do it as a simple matter of scratch math, $270 million infusion divided by 169 municipalities is about $1.6 million. $100 million is about, I would say, $750,000 per town. $170 million is about $1 million per town. So, that's assuming an even divide between $169 million. The thing to stay tuned for in the future for everybody, every municipality or every town, is how is that money going to be divided? How big an impact is it going to have? My guess would be not much.
Final comment from me, actually, on that $100 million that you mentioned about the municipalities, which is obviously coming from the Mashantucket, Pequot, and Mohegan Fund, is just a one-off, apparently. So again, to your point, how not only do you split it, but, in future, what happens as well. Nick, great reporting on that. Thank you ever so much. And our final story today is about recent efforts on the state and local level to limit student use of cell phones during the school day. It's a national story, and Connecticut might actually be behind the curve on such efforts to improve learning, remove distractions, and shelter students from social media in school. But in a state still shaken by the 2012 school shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary, will parents agree? Our reporter Eric Obernauer joins us remotely now with that story. Eric.
We've really come full circle on this issue. Starting from when cell phones first became prevalent, schools were sort of caught flat-footed, didn't really know what to do, made some efforts to limit their use, then did a 180 and said, hey, bring these smartphones into school. These kids have a digital powerhouse right at their fingertips to do research and so forth. Now we're rethinking that for all kinds of reasons.
Yeah, because I mean, Governor Lamont actually introduced a sort of like a limited bill, I believe, earlier this year, which was putting some restrictions in. Now they're looking at a bell-to-bell bill, which is currently going through. Greg, what did you want to add to that?
Well, certainly we've seen a few local districts. We've seen New Britain. We've seen Darien take a lead on limiting the use of cell phones or the access to cell phones. I think that it's also part of this broader push we've seen from the Attorney General's office, William Tong, to potentially create limits on underage or minors' use of social media. And it's this, I think maybe just people are looking at what's happening. They're looking at this toxic culture online. They're looking at child mental health. And maybe they're looking for villains, maybe or easy answers, but I don't think there will be one.
We're also seeing more things as well, more stories, of course, about the actual social media organizations themselves, having to explain whether or not what they created was in fact addictive to, under 18-year-olds, under 16-year-olds. So there's a lot of media going around on this at the moment.
I checked with kind of the largest school districts in the state, and just about all of them now have policies at least limiting phone use, if not outright banning them. So in some sense, the legislature is actually a little bit behind the eight ball, because a lot of school districts have been taking the lead locally in restricting their use.
Nick, you had a point.
I can see all kinds of thorny things just off the top of my head with this issue, because how would they propose to ban these things? You're going to pat down kids to make sure they don't have phones. You're going to make them stay after school. Because they carry in a phone, they're going to confiscate the phones. Do you have a sense of how a ban statewide might go, or have they not gotten into that deep into it yet?
But the mechanics of implementing a ban are not hard. I mean, most schools have a policy clearly stating that phones are not allowed in the classrooms, and students with a phone are actually required to turn them in the morning, and they're put in what are called yonder packs or pouches, which I don't know quite how it works. It's basically a magnetized device so that the phone cannot be accessed until the end of the day when the pouch is opened. So that's not really an issue. I do think, though, there is some pushback on this, and I think when you mentioned Newtown, what happened in that tragedy is very much in the back of people's minds, particularly in this state, obviously. That and in Ridgefield had a school board meeting discussion about this issue, and a lot of parents were very upset that the district was moving forward with a ban.
Greg,
I think that where Connecticut is a state that maybe uniquely with the school shooting and with the legacy of 9/11, this idea of contacting or being in constant contact, or the constant ability to contact sort of loved ones, family, children, is just deeply ingrained into the culture and something that people really worry about. And so this certainly, it's something that I'm hearing about. But I also hear conversations about a class divide, and that in wealthier schools, and that wealthier parents are actually increasingly pushing against this digitized learning culture and are kind of going back old school, and that they found that seems to work better. And so it's funny, a few years ago, it was the other way around. Everyone was saying that it was the rich children that had access, the wealthy families that had access to this digital technology. And so they had the boost. And now maybe it's flipped.
As we record this, it is actually that bill is currently going through. So it will be interesting to see whether or not it actually makes it through and becomes law in Connecticut. Time now for a look at events and things to do with our arts editor, Robin Breeding. Welcome back as always, Robin. What have you got for us?
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to start out with an art opening that is actually in Providence. And there is an opening at Katie Tompkins Gallery in Providence. The opening is Donna Maria Bruton, 20 Recipes for Patience. And I have to say that Katie Tompkins Gallery in Providence is one of my favorite galleries in the region. I think she's a really smart curator and always has really high quality shows.
I love the idea of going to an art gallery and everything right on the campus of Brown. I mean, that's a great built-in trip.
So the collection features apparently monoprints, lithographs, woodcuts, dry points, etchings, and collages. So a good cross-section of art there. That's on May 8th to September 18th. What else have you got for us?
All right. Another one is Brown Grotto Arts in Wilton. And again, it's another one of these specialty galleries that has very short runs, but they put together themed exhibitions with international artists. They typically focus on crafts, craft-based art. So this particular show is called Transformations, and I think they're taking artists who, transform steel mesh, wool, things you discard, and creating sort of narrative structures with those unusual materials.
That's from May 9th to the 17th. What else have you got?
All right. Right up in our neck of the woods is the Carolyn Black Garden at Connecticut College Arboretum. For those of you who do not know it, the Connecticut College Arboretum is probably one of the most beautiful gardens in the state. They have tours of the Carolyn Black Garden, and also their native plant garden is coming up to be in full bloom.
This is when, they have a fabulous collection of viburnum, of dogwood, of cherries, of azaleas. It's right across from really from the entrance to the college. It's a beautiful place to walk around, to have a picnic, and no better time of the year. You might think the summer, but it's the spring and the flowers.
And
Absolutely.
the other thing is as well is they often have their staff who are doing obviously many duties in the Arboretum as well. And I've been walking around there before, and they're very helpful if you want to identify a plant or find out. They're very helpful in telling you that sort of information. So the Connecticut College Arboretum, which is open throughout the year, but that's a great one. What else have you got for us?
All right. On Saturday, May 16th in New Haven, we have Theoretical Minimum, and that is a new music concert at Firehouse 12 in New Haven. And for those of you who don't know anything about new music, it can be a fusion of classical, jazz, all different kinds of things. This particular show is going to have some pieces for prepared piano.
So this is a case where often we sort of hear this new classical music. We hear it in sort of like temples of learning, and in these sort of sterile settings. But this is a chance to listen to this music in like a bar setting, right? Have a drink, listen to prepared piano.
If any of you know about Conlon Nancaro, it's in that kind of genre. It's very
dissonant.
Yes, dissonant.
And if you've never been to Firehouse 12 as well, that is an amazing location in downtown New Haven, because it is, of course, an old firehouse, and it is beautifully redone as a venue. And I've been there for music, and the acoustics in there just absolutely amazing. That's Saturday, May 16th between 7:30 and 11 p.m. at Firehouse 12 in New Haven.
May 16th, we have one of my favorite plants that is coming up in the woods is the lady slipper. And with the Denison Nature Center in Mystic, they're having a walk and talk with somebody to point out where these grow in the woods. And it's at the Peace Sanctuary in Mystic.
So when these come out, you're walking around the woods. I've been walking around the woods of Connecticut for years, but I'm never not excited when I see a lady slipper. And sometimes you'll see them in groups of 10 or 12 or a dozen, and it's something special. And this is the time, and Mystic Woods, why not?
Yeah. And actually, it's like a little mini orchid. It's a very beautiful thing. In fact, the Marie Selby Gardens in Sarasota, the former head of the botany program was fired for stealing one in Peru. So they're really special plants. Okay, this one is nice. May 16th, the Garden Conservancy has open days, and this one is at Stony Creek. We don't know the exact location until you sign up. It's only open one day a year, and it's a beautiful 1 acre property that you can go visit. It has beautiful hedges and topiaries and borders. It says it's a rollicking serpent prune tapestry hedge. Sounds great.
And if you want to find out more details about that, as Robin said, gardenconservancy.org. Robin, thank you for all of that. That brings us to the end of this edition. My thanks to Robin, Greg, Eric, Ali, and Nick. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news? It's just $20 for the year. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.